Admiral Jonathan Hale had commanded fleets, survived battles, and stood firmly through storms that would have crushed most men. Yet behind his stern posture and calm leadership, there was a silence that followed him everywhere, a silence tied to one night long ago. No one in the naval base talked about it openly, but everyone felt its presence. Some whispered that the admiral had made a mistake during a mission. Others believed he lost someone dear to him. But nobody knew for sure. The truth remained locked behind his steady eyes and controlled voice. Every year, on the same date, the admiral quietly left his office at sunset and walked to the memorial wall near the harbor. He always chose a time when no one else was around. The guards knew not to follow him. He would stand in front of a single engraved name, staring at it like it held a part of his soul. The flickering lights from the harbor reflected on his face, revealing emotions he hid during the day: pain, regret, longing. After a few silent minutes, he would turn and walk back to his quarters. And the next morning, he returned to being the strict, disciplined Admiral Hale everyone respected. But those who observed closely could sense that something inside him remained unfinished, unsettled. On the day of the annual Veterans Ceremony, the base was filled with excitement. Dozens of retired sailors, old men with medals on their chests and stories in their eyes, arrived to revisit the place where they had once served. Young officers greeted them warmly, guided them around, and listened to their tales of bravery and mischief. But Admiral Hale was not thinking about speeches or presentations that day. He was looking through the list of attending veterans when he saw a name that made him stop breathing for a second. Samuel Briggs, Petty Officer First Class, a name he had not heard in nearly 4 decades. A name he had believed was lost forever in the fire and chaos of that tragic night. A name engraved in his memory and connected to the guilt that had shadowed him for years. The Admiral's hand tightened around the paper. His heart, usually steady even during crises, began to race. He read the name again and again, convincing himself he wasn't imagining it. Samuel Briggs, alive, coming to the base. How? Why? What did he remember? The Admiral walked quickly toward the ceremony hall, trying to control his thoughts, but the memories came crashing in like waves hitting a stormy shore. He remembered the explosion, the smell of burning metal, the screams echoing through the ship, and the moment he thought Briggs was gone forever. He had replayed that night hundreds of times, searching for what he could have done differently, and each time the guilt grew heavier. What if he had turned back sooner? What if he had ordered an evacuation earlier? What if his decisions had cost lives? The Admiral stepped into the hall and was met by the sound of applause, laughter, and cheerful greetings. But his eyes scanned the room until they landed on a thin, elderly man walking with a cane. His hair was white and his uniform was faded with age, but there was something unmistakable about him. The posture, the eyes, the quiet strength. Samuel Briggs. The Admiral felt his breath catch in his throat. For a moment, he considered walking away. How would Briggs react? Would he blame the Admiral for what happened that night? Would he demand answers? Or, worse, would he reveal something that the Admiral had spent years burying? But Briggs was not looking away. He was watching the Admiral with a gaze that was not filled with anger or accusation. Instead, it held something unexpected, an emotion the Admiral couldn't identify, but it made his chest tighten even more. The Admiral stood frozen as Briggs slowly approached, each step steady despite the cane. The chatter in the room faded into the background. It felt as if the entire world had gone silent, leaving only the two of them in that moment. The Admiral lifted his chin, trying to maintain the strong image he was known for, but his hands trembled slightly, something he hoped no one noticed. Memories from decades ago swirled in his mind. Briggs shouting orders to younger sailors, Briggs carrying an injured crew member on his back during training, Briggs refusing to abandon shipmates even when others urged him to. Briggs had been brave, reliable, respected. Losing him had been one of the greatest wounds in the Admiral's life, and now he was standing there alive. The Admiral felt a strange mixture of fear, disbelief, and hope. He didn't know what Briggs had come to say, but he knew the truth about that night was finally going to emerge from the shadows. The Admiral wasn't sure he was ready for it. As Briggs came closer, the Admiral realized that this moment, long feared, long avoided, was unavoidable now. Whatever truth Briggs carried, it was about to be spoken. And whether it brought relief or more pain, it would end the silence that had followed the Admiral for 38 long years. And deep inside, the Admiral knew this meeting would change everything. Samuel Briggs moved slowly through the crowd of veterans, leaning slightly on his cane. His eyes were calm, almost unreadable, yet they seemed to hold decades of untold stories. Unlike the others who were laughing, shaking hands, and reminiscing about old missions, Briggs remained quiet, as if he carried a heavy burden that no amount of celebration could lift. People occasionally glanced at him, sensing a quiet dignity, a man who had seen too much to waste energy on small talk. But no one dared ask him what he was thinking, and Briggs had no intention of sharing it with strangers. He walked with purpose, his gaze never leaving the Admiral. Each step brought him closer. Each step felt deliberate, like a drumbeat echoing through the Admiral's mind. Jonathan Hale, the Admiral, was known for his composure, but at that moment, he felt something stir inside, a mixture of anticipation and fear. He had faced battles, storms, and crises, yet the approach of Briggs made him feel like a young officer again, vulnerable and exposed. Briggs finally stopped a few feet in front of the Admiral. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the laughter of old friends, all of it seemed to fade into a distant murmur. Time itself appeared to slow down as the two men faced each other, separated by decades of memory and silence. "Admiral Hale," Briggs said softly, his voice steady but carrying a weight that seemed to press down on the room. "It's been a long time." Hale's throat tightened. He had imagined this encounter countless times over the years. In his mind, he had rehearsed countless scenarios, Briggs shouting at him, pointing fingers, demanding answers. But the reality was different. Briggs's tone was calm, almost gentle, and it disarmed the Admiral more than any accusation ever could. "I thought you didn't make it that night," the Admiral finally managed to say, his voice strained with emotion. Briggs nodded once, slowly. "I know. Everyone did. That's what made it so hard to come forward." There was a pause. The two men stood silently, each measuring the weight of the moment. Hale felt his heart pounding, each beat echoing memories he had tried to bury. The explosion, the fire, the screams, the chaos, it all came rushing back in vivid detail. He could see the ship's deck splitting apart, the sailors struggling to survive, the flames licking through the corridors. Oh, and then the moment he had never been able to forget, the last time he saw Briggs trapped and fighting against the tide, a look of fear and determination on his face. He had thought Briggs was gone forever. Now Briggs was here, alive and standing in front of him. Hale didn't know what to expect. Would Briggs blame him? Would he demand explanations? Would he accuse Hale of mistakes that had haunted him for years? Men were shouting, running, some tripping over the debris, some carrying the wounded, all trying desperately to survive the disaster that had struck without warning. Briggs's hands shook slightly as he spoke, though his voice remained firm. "I remember the flames, the smoke, the confusion," he said. "It was like the ship itself was alive, roaring and twisting around us, and yet, through all the chaos, I saw you, Admiral, pushing through the fire. You didn't hesitate, not even for a second." Hale's breath caught. Even after decades, the memory returned vividly, sharper than he had ever imagined. He recalled the heat, the fear, and the adrenaline. He remembered trying to give orders while dodging falling beams, helping crew members to safety, and shouting for everyone to stay calm. But some moments were foggy, lost in the blur of terror and smoke. Now Briggs was giving him a perspective he had never heard before, one that highlighted acts of courage that Hale had buried under guilt. Briggs continued, his eyes glistening. "I was trapped beneath a collapsed section of the deck, the heat scorching my face, smoke filling my lungs. You were right there, crawling under the twisted metal to reach me and others. You were coughing, choking, but you never stopped. You pulled sailors out, one after another, even when the fire spread faster than anyone could have imagined." Hale felt a lump in his throat. He had never counted how many men he saved that night. He only remembered trying to save as many as possible. Briggs's words reminded him that, even in his own confusion, his efforts had made a real difference. "I thought I failed them all," Hale whispered, barely audible. I thought I lost everything that night." Briggs shook his head gently. "I know, sir. You saved lives. You saved me. I remember being tossed into the water when the second blast hit the ship. I was thrown into the night, and when I came to, hours later, a rescue boat had found me. Everyone else thought I was gone, but I survived because of the last order you gave to make sure everyone had a chance to escape. You didn't fail. You never failed us." Hale's hands were trembling now, gripping the arms of his chair for support. He had carried guilt for decades, thinking that a single misstep had cost lives, that his decisions had been flawed. But Briggs's words were dismantling those years of self-recrimination, piece by piece. He had never imagined hearing that the lives he had saved were acknowledged in such a direct and personal way. Briggs paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Then he continued, his voice softer, almost reverent. "You see, sir, we never spoke about it because it was too painful. I was in a coma for weeks, recovering from the injuries. By the time I woke up, the ship had returned and everyone assumed I had perished. You left that night thinking some were lost, some were saved. But you couldn't have known the full story. You only acted with courage, with heart, with everything you had, and that made all the difference." The Admiral swallowed hard. "I remember the fire, the chaos. I remember shouting orders, but I remember being terrified. I remember thinking I couldn't save everyone. I remember thinking I had failed." Briggs's gaze softened. "You didn't fail. Every life you saved, every sailor you pulled from that fire, you gave them hope. You gave them a chance to live. And even those we lost, they followed your orders until the very end. They trusted you with their lives. They respected you, even as we faced death." The Admiral closed his eyes briefly, letting Briggs's words sink in. The guilt, the remorse, the endless questioning of every decision he had made that night, all of it had weighed on him for decades. And yet now he could feel a glimmer of clarity, a sense of relief that he had not expected. It wasn't just the acknowledgement of bravery, it was the realization that the chaos of that night, the lives lost and saved, had been shaped by the courage and integrity he had brought to the moment. Briggs leaned slightly on his cane, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "Sir, there's more you need to know. That night, your actions didn't just save lives. They inspired others to act, to take risks they might not have taken on their own. And some of those who fell, they did so trying to save others, trying to honor the leadership you showed. You created a ripple of bravery that none of us would have survived without your guidance." The Admiral's eyes filled with tears. He had carried the memory of that night like a stone in his chest, a weight that grew heavier with each passing. And now, Briggs was showing him that the stone had been a misunderstanding, that the courage he displayed had not gone unnoticed, that his actions had saved not only bodies but souls, not only lives but hope. Briggs's words painted a vivid picture of that night, of the fire, the fear, the chaos, and most importantly of the human courage that had emerged because of Hale. The Admiral realized that the story he had told himself for decades of failure and guilt was incomplete. The truth was far richer, far more human, and for the first time in nearly 40 years, he felt a flicker of peace. Briggs' voice softened again. Sir, I survived that night because of you. And I came today not to blame you, but to help you finally see what the rest of us have known all along. Your courage saved lives, your leadership mattered, and the kindness you showed in the heat of danger, the selflessness you displayed, that is what kept many of us alive. Hale's chest scanning each line. His eyes scanning each line. It was from one of the sailors who had perished that night, a young man Hale had considered a son in all but blood. The words were simple, heartfelt, and filled with a reverence that struck Hale like a lightning bolt. "You, sir, saved my life twice already." The letter began. "If anything happens tonight, know that it wasn't his fault. He did everything a leader and a good man could do. We follow him because he never leaves anyone behind. Hale's breath caught. His chest felt tight as though the letter had struck a chord deep within him that had remained untouched for decades. He remembered the flames, the smoke, the screams, and the panic. He remembered feeling helpless, thinking that he had failed every single soul on that deck. And now, decades later, he was reading the acknowledgement of someone he had tried so desperately to save. Someone who had believed in him even in their final moments. Briggs leaned closer, his voice gentle. For all these years you carried guilt. You blamed yourself for the men we lost. You thought you could have done more. But the truth is, those men respected you. They followed you because of your courage, your leadership, your heart. What you did that night mattered more than you ever realized. Tears filled Hale's eyes, blurring the words on the page. He had spent so many nights awake replaying that night over and over, imagining different outcomes, wondering if he could have saved just one more life. The weight of decades of guilt, sorrow, and self-recrimination pressed down on him, but now, standing face to face with Briggs and holding that letter, the stone inside him began to crumble. Briggs's voice broke through the silence again, calm but resolute. Sir, the men who survived, many of them owe their lives to you. And the men who didn't, they followed your orders and they knew you gave everything to save them. They knew you never left anyone behind. That knowledge carried them even in their final moments. You didn't fail. You honored them. Hale's shoulders shook as tears streamed down his face. For 38 years, he had carried a burden he never deserved to bear alone. He had punished himself for choices made in the chaos of a burning ship, for decisions taken under pressure that no one could have anticipated. And now, in the quiet of that moment, the weight began to lift. The truth, the whole truth, was finally being revealed, not through blame, not through accusation, but through acknowledgement, gratitude, and love from those who had witnessed his courage. Briggs placed a hand on Hale's trembling shoulder. You saved lives that night, including mine. I came today to free you from the weight you never deserved to carry. You are not the man who failed. You are the man who gave everything he had, who put others before himself, and who led with integrity and courage when it mattered most. The Admiral pressed the letter to his chest, shaking as if trying to absorb all the emotions of decades into that single moment. I thought I lost everything, he whispered, his voice breaking. I thought I had failed them all. No, sir, Briggs said softly. You didn't. You gave us hope, you gave us life, and you gave us someone to believe in when everything seemed lost. Hale felt a warmth spreading through him, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and long-awaited peace. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, he could breathe without the crushing weight of guilt. He looked at Briggs, the man he thought he had lost, and saw not only a survivor but a witness to his actions, a living testament to the courage and selflessness he had displayed that night. The sun had begun to set outside, casting a golden glow across the memorial wall, illuminating the engraved names and the 2 men standing together. It felt as if the past and present were converging, forgiving the Admiral for the pain he had carried, honoring the sacrifices of those who had fallen, and allowing a new chapter of understanding to begin. Briggs gave a faint nod, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged in fire, loss, and survival. Hale, his voice trembling, managed to say, I don't know how to thank you. Briggs smiled faintly. You don't need to. Just know that the truth has been spoken and the weight has been lifted. That is thanks enough. The Admiral wiped his tears, looking at the letter one last time before folding it carefully. He felt something he hadn't felt in decades, a sense of closure, of peace, of redemption. For the first time, he allowed himself to truly honor those who had been lost, the lives he had saved, and the courage that had carried them all through that night. And as he stood there, the Admiral realized that the darkness of the past no longer held him captive. The truth had been revealed. The kindness, courage, and sacrifice of that night had finally been acknowledged. And in that acknowledgement, he found not only peace, but a profound understanding. That the greatest acts of heroism are often measured not in medals or titles, but in the lives saved and the hearts touched, even decades later.